Hi there, I'm Dr. Kit Slice. I'm a psychologist and life coach, and I'm here to inspire your confidence, your self-compassion, and your growth. And today I am talking about communication styles. There are four main communication styles. We have a passive communication style, an aggressive communication style, a passive aggressive communication style, and then the Goldilocks version of communication, which is an assertive communication style. And the reason why I wanted to talk about these different kinds of communication styles is communication is how we get our needs met in relationships. It's how we manage or avoid conflict. And it's really important in relationships and in our overall stress levels. So let me talk a little bit about the different kinds of communication styles and how they might impact us. So a passive communication style is a communication style where the person really puts the needs of other people before their own needs. And how this comes across is they might be really apologetic. They might think they're making requests, but they're not making a request. In their mind, it's a request, but doesn't sound like it. So an example of that might be something like, it'd be really nice if you could do this thing for me. That's not a request, that's a statement. So in their mind, they might think that they've made a request and the other person has not heard a request. All they've heard is just a statement about what would be nice for them. And so passive communicators, again, they tend to be very apologetic. They use kind of hedging language, and their statements just are not very, they're not very clear. And again, the reason for this is because they're putting other people's needs before their own. They might be afraid of conflict, and so they're afraid if they make a direct request that that will be hard for the other person, or they're afraid to say no. They're afraid it's going to be upsetting to the other person if they say no. So they also might say they might think they're saying no when they're not really saying no. So an example of that might be, hey, could you take on this extra project? And they might say, well, gosh, I'm sorry. I've really got a lot going on right now. And so in their mind, they might think it sounds like a no, and the other person is just hearing an opening. It's like, okay, well, you've got a lot going on. What's one more thing, right? So that's a passive communication style. How that impacts a person is it can be really stressful. Here they are, they're not making clear requests for their needs, and so their needs probably aren't getting met. They're not setting clear boundaries, and so they're maybe taking on a lot of stuff or feeling like their boundaries are violated. And a lot of times I find people who communicate passively end up feeling a lot of resentment, again, because they think they're making requests or they think they're setting clear boundaries, and they're not. So they end up feeling resentful toward the other person in the relationship, when in reality, they could be clearer and more assertive in their language, and everybody would end up feeling happier because the other person in that relationship has a clear expectation of what's being asked for them, or a clear boundary, and they're able to respect that. And then the person who's making those requests or putting boundaries is feeling less resentful and less stress as a result. So that's passive communication. Aggressive communication is sort of the opposite end of the spectrum. What they are doing, as opposed to the passive communicator, an aggressive communicator is going to really prioritize their own needs without considering the needs or rights of the other person. Aggressive communicators they might be loud in their communication, but what's most important is that they tend to make demands. So they're not making requests, they're demanding things. They might use criticism or bullying to get their needs met or their demands known. And so, I mean, aggression is pretty self-explanatory, right? They might come off again as a bully, and are being very critical of the other person, or when they're making a demand, they're not considering the other person's feelings or emotions in those statements. So aggressive communicators are also creating stress in their lives. Uh, they might wonder why their relationships are not fulfilling, when in reality, people might fear them, or they might just avoid communicating with them because they don't want to be in a situation where they're being criticized or being put down or being yelled at. So aggressive communication creates its own stress for different reasons. And then we have passive aggressive communicators. And these are folks who are somewhere in the middle between the passive and aggressive, but not in the Goldilocks zone. They are using elements of passive communication and aggressive communication. A lot of times this will sound like sarcasm or just mumbling under their breath. Maybe they're making a clear statement or an aggressive statement, but they're not stating it in an aggressive way. They might make a hedging sort of passive statement, but then add an aggressive twist to that. And so passive aggressive communicators are really not stepping into their power. So similar to a passive communicator, they might feel resentment. They might feel like they're not getting their needs met because they're not stating things in a clear or assertive manner. And again, there's that aggressive component because they are trying to step into power in some way, but it's not coming out in a helpful way. So that's passive aggressive communication. And then we have the Goldilocks zone of assertive communication. And what an assertive communicator does is that they are considering their own needs and requests alongside the needs and requests of another person. Assertive communicators are able to make clear requests without demanding, and they're able to set boundaries clearly. And an assertive communicator, so let's take an example. Let's say there's somebody who doesn't like hugging, and another person comes up and either hugs this person or attempts to hug them. If they were a passive communicator, they might sound like, gee, I really don't enjoy hugs, or something along those lines. There's not a clear request there, okay? They're not setting a clear boundary. An assertive or an aggressive communicator might say something along the lines of, they might push them back or say, what are you, crazy? Are you stupid? Why would you hug me? Okay, they're criticizing, blaming, bullying. A passive aggressive communicator might make a sarcastic joke about people who hug. Oh, people who hug are so silly, or people who hug are weak, or something like that, where they're not clearly directly addressing the person in front of them. It's a passive attempt, but using aggression to make a statement about hugging in general, but it's not relevant to that specific communication instance. Whereas an assertive communicator might sound like, oh, I appreciate you not hugging me, even though I can understand that's something that you might enjoy. Maybe we can find a different ritual for when we come together. How do you feel about fist bumps? Okay. So do you see how the assertive communicator is clearly setting a boundary of, you know, I appreciate you not hugging me. Please don't hug me. That's a clear boundary. And they are also considering that the other person, maybe they like some aspect of when two people come together, they enjoy some ritual in that. And so then they're going back to, okay, what are my needs? I'd be okay with a fist bump or high five or something like that. That's okay for my personal taste. And then they're offering that as a solution and asking for the other person's input on that. So that's assertive communication. And assertive communicators tend to just have less stress. They're getting their needs met. They're typically in situations where they are aware of what their boundaries are. That's a key piece. A lot of us don't even know what our boundaries are. And so that's a whole other story. But assertive communicators are aware of what their needs are, what their boundaries are, and they're able to communicate those. And they're not apologetic about it, because we don't need to be sorry for having personal space, for having clear boundaries. For, if somebody asks us to do something and we know that it's not within our bandwidth to do that, we don't have to be sorry about that, even though maybe, the other person might not enjoy hearing that their request, that we're not able to satisfy their request. It's not us who's making them sad in that situation. And it's okay if the other person is sad or upset because we're not able to abide by a request. Like, let's say they ask us to pick them up one day. Hey, can you pick me up on your, I need a ride to this thing or whatever that is. And for whatever reason, you can't do it, and you're able to say, I would love to help you. And the reality is that I can't, or whatever your reason is. And you don't need to give a reason specifically, but just stating that clearly so that you're not adding more stress onto your plate. Or here's the other situation I see: as a passive communicator might be afraid to say no, even though they know they really can't fit that ride into their schedule. It's not going to work out. And then they end up backing out at the last minute. And now it's more stressful for everybody. Now that person last minute has to find a ride. When if you had been an assertive communicator, you could have said, I cannot give you a ride on that day and time. Now that person has the ability to find a ride and the time to do it. So assertive communication can feel hard. There are some other strategies that we can discuss of how to do that. I statements is another one that I'll talk about at another time. But I just wanted to highlight the differences in communication style. My hope for you is that you're able to do some reflection on what category do you think you fall into most of the time. And you might fluctuate between different styles in different situations, but asking yourself, hey, are there ways that I could be more assertive in my communication, whether you're on the passive side or the aggressive side? Just thinking about how can you state your needs clearly and also take the other person into consideration when you're communicating with them. And I will talk more about I statements another time as a really wonderful way to use assertive communication. But I hope you found these descriptions helpful, and I hope that they increased your awareness so that they give you more confidence to use assertive communication skills. And remember to always be kind to yourself. If you're finding that you're falling into a category that you don't want to be in, please have compassion for yourself in that moment to allow you to transition into the more assertive communication style. I hope you found this helpful, and I'll see you next time. Bye.